My sister told my boss I was robbing the company to get my position, but karma hit hard. Now she is homeless. There was always something performative about Cassandra's kindness. The way her lips curled just a little too tight when she smiled. The way her eyes darted about rooms like a thief casing for vulnerabilities rather than genuinely engaging. She had the instincts of someone who studied people not to love them, but to leverage them. I noticed it young, of course, in the small cruelties she masked as jokes, in the way she borrowed my clothes and returned them stained, stretched, unapologetically altered. But I had mistaken those little betrayals for sibling rivalry, not the opening gestures of a long campaign to replace me. Our lives diverged like a forked road, one of us steady, the other sharp and shifting. I built my career meticulously, layer by layer, like a glass tower erected on granite. No shortcuts, no favors cashed in. Just competence, consistency, and a work ethic that left little room for error. Cassandra, on the other hand, flitted from job to job like a moth that mistook every flame for home. She had a talent for charming her way into rooms she wasn't qualified to be in, only to discover too late that charm doesn't pay dividends when audits come knocking. When the anonymous email landed in HR's inbox, cloaked in a pretense of moral obligation, it was laced with just enough specificity to appear credible. My sister, it began with the icy intimacy of betrayal, has been funneling client funds into a personal slush account. Check invoice series 448C through 454F. She's smart, hides it behind real transactions, but I thought someone should know. That was her stroke of genius, really, embedding the lie in the architecture of truth. The invoices were real, the accounts were mine, but the manipulation was fabricated. I still remember the sterile chill of the HR office, the way the glass walls seemed to mock my transparency as I sat in that polished chair and listened to them list the charges. They were calm, clinical, disturbingly kind, as if they pitied me. They handed me a suspension letter as though it were a death notice, spoken softly, while ensuring everyone in the department knew before I did. There's something about being accused, not by enemies but by blood, that hollows you out in a different way. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the bitterness of realizing someone had traded your life for ambition wrapped in jealousy. I didn't panic. That wasn't in my nature. I gathered everything: paper trails, access logs, financial breakdowns. I reconstructed my transactions with the precision of a forensic accountant and delivered them in an email thread that stretched longer than a legal drama's closing argument. I offered everything on a silver platter: spreadsheets, receipts, timestamps, cross-referenced approvals. My defense was unimpeachable, and it was only then, when the dust began to settle and HR began to question the source, that Cassandra's own secrets began to unravel. She had been siphoning off petty cash from her own company for months, maybe longer, quietly padding reimbursements, submitting duplicate expense claims, inflating client entertainment costs. She probably thought no one would look twice at her financials while everyone was busy inspecting mine. But lies, like rot, tend to seep through floors when given time. The audit team, alerted by irregularities and emboldened by their embarrassment at having almost pinned an innocent woman, went digging. And what they found didn't just incriminate her. It dismantled her entire narrative. She was terminated immediately. Not quietly, not with dignity. Her name was scrubbed from the company directory with an efficiency that almost felt cruel. Her apartment lease, dependent on her inflated income, fell through within weeks. Her fiancé, an accountant himself, took one look at the audit report and walked out without so much as a backward glance. She tried spinning it, of course, blaming everything from systemic sexism to toxic work culture. But people tend to flee sinking ships when the captain's holding the torch. Last I heard, she was crashing on a friend's couch in a neighborhood she used to mock me for living in. The text started with excuses, quickly shifted to sob stories. "I messed up," she wrote, "but we're sisters. Can't we talk?" I didn't respond, not because I was angry, though I was, but because there's something sacred in silence, a line drawn in quiet sand. She didn't want reconciliation. She wanted a lifeline, a reset, a way back to the version of her life she thought I owed her. But there was no bridge left to cross. She hadn't just burned it, she danced in the ashes. I could have helped her. Before all of it, before the whisper campaigns and the forged accusations, I might have carved out a place for her, recommended her for roles, helped her course correct. But she didn't want a ladder. She wanted to push me off mine, And now, stripped of the armor she thought was made of ambition, all that's left is someone who misunderstood the difference between envy and entitlement. She sees me now, not as the sister she once mimicked, but as the person she tried to erase and failed to. I walk past the conference rooms where my nameplate still shines, past the assistant who never stopped believing in my integrity, past the new promotion plaque they gave me after the dust settled, and I think, not with joy, not with vengeance, but with the eerie detachment of someone who survived sabotage, that karma doesn't need permission to do its work. It doesn't yell. It doesn't announce its presence. It simply waits. And when it arrives, it doesn't just knock. It lets itself in. They say success is the best revenge. But what they fail to mention is how hollow the echo sounds when it bounces off the ruins left behind by betrayal. The weeks after Cassandra's fall unfolded like a storm receding from a battlefield. Quiet, damp, everything coated in the debris of what once was. At work, people walked on eggshells around me, offering awkward smiles and half-hearted apologies as though proximity could rewrite their silence during the accusations. They had watched me drown in suspicion, and none of them had even offered a rope. Yet I wasn't interested in vindication from them. My absolution had come through hard data and exposed lies. Their guilt wasn't my concern, but hers. Hers lingered like a sour note trapped in the back of the throat. Cassandra didn't vanish. She persisted, like a virus that mutates when cornered. Her messages became more frequent, less coherent. Pleas dissolved into accusations, then returned again to sentimental appeals. "You think you're better than me?" she wrote one night, at 3 a.m, the timestamp glowing coldly on my locked screen. "You've always had the advantage, the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect face for the corporate machine. I had to fight for scraps. You don't know what it's like to never be chosen." I read that one a few times before deleting it. There was truth buried in her venom, but it was warped, shaped by her need to be the victim in a story she wrote with a poisoned pen. She wasn't wrong that I had been praised more, trusted more, listened to more. But she never once asked why. She saw the spotlight, not the long nights. She saw my title, not the years of thankless grinding that led to it. Jealousy is a lens that blinds as much as it magnifies. Despite everything, a part of me couldn't stop watching her descent. It was like witnessing the collapse of a cathedral you once admired. Even if you'd stopped believing in its holiness, the fall still demanded reverence. Her social media turned cryptic. Gone were the curated brunch photos, the number girl boss captions, the carefully angled selfies in executive glass offices. Now it was filtered nostalgia and vague affirmations. New beginnings are painful but powerful. Or, sometimes you lose what you thought you needed to find your true path. I could almost hear the desperation clawing beneath the hashtags. She started a blog. Of course she did. It was dripping in curated vulnerability, reflections on toxic siblings, professional gaslighting, and the patriarchy disguised as HR protocol. It was laughably transparent to me, but to the uninformed eye, it probably read as some self-help survivor saga. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She turned her own treachery into content, her consequences into a branding opportunity. But an audience can't fix a broken foundation. The more she tried to reframe her downfall as a rebirth, the more it exposed her refusal to acknowledge the role she played in her own undoing. I didn't respond, not when she asked for help with job applications. Not when she hinted about needing money. Not even when she sent me a photo of the apartment she lost, captioned with, "You remember this view? Thought I'd have it forever." There was a time I might have felt guilt, might have called her, might have offered to meet, talk, to hash out the ruins between us. But that time had died the day she decided her ambition mattered more than my life. I knew where she was staying. Third-hand gossip from a mutual friend who didn't realize they were still on speaking terms with both of us. A one-bedroom crash pad belonging to a girl named Tasha, someone Cassandra had met during her brief stint as a yoga instructor between corporate jobs. Apparently, Cassandra had overstayed her welcome by several weeks. "She cries a lot," the friend said, eyes darting sideways as if confessing a crime. "But only when she thinks someone's watching." That line stayed with me. There was something performative even in her grief. Meanwhile, my own life had not just recovered, it had accelerated. The promotion came quietly, without ceremony. A new title, A larger office with a view that overlooked the same skyline we once dreamed of conquering together as kids. I'd stare out those floor-to-ceiling windows and remember her words from a year ago. "I want what you have." She hadn't meant it as admiration. She meant it like a vow, a curse. She had always mistaken proximity for entitlement. Because we shared blood, she thought she deserved the fruits of my labor. But she hadn't bled the same way. She hadn't made the sacrifices. She hadn't put in the hours, endured the criticisms, swallowed the indignities that come with climbing the ladder when no one's pulling you up. Cassandra thought wanting was enough. That envy was a valid currency, but the world doesn't pay out to those who feel they deserve, only to those who earn. I sometimes wondered if she believed her own lies, if the act had become her truth, if, in her version of events, she truly saw herself as a martyr, crucified by a corporate machine that couldn't handle her vision. Maybe she had rewritten the narrative so many times that the original betrayal no longer looked like betrayal to her, just a necessary evil, a misunderstood move in a larger game she thought she could win. But life, unlike corporate promotions, doesn't come with appeals. It moves forward whether you're ready or not, and in that forward motion, there are no guarantees, only momentum, only consequences. One night, as I was leaving the office late, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a photo. Cassandra again. This time standing outside a soup kitchen, the background blurred, her makeup faded, her posture defeated. She wrote, "I get it now. I do. I really do. I was wrong. About everything. I just want to start over. Can we talk?" I stared at the image, letting the silence of the empty hallway stretch around me like fog. She looked like a ghost of herself. Not just physically, but spiritually, as though whatever spark she'd used to justify her betrayals had finally burned out. And still, I said nothing. Forgiveness, they say, is a virtue, but so is self-preservation, and some ruins are meant to stay buried. The final time Cassandra contacted me, it wasn't a text, it wasn't a social media post, it was a letter, an actual ink-on-paper letter sealed in a cheap envelope, delivered to my office address as if she knew she no longer had permission to breach the personal perimeter of my life. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like she'd written it with trembling fingers or perhaps an unsteady conscience. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, feeling the weight of something inevitable pressing against my chest. Inside, the paper was thin, creased, written on both sides in blue ink. No preamble, no dramatic opening, just Cassandra, raw, unfiltered, stripped of the posturing that had once been her armor. "You win," it began, not in the gloating way, not in the way I used to fear, but in the way that someone wins a war they never asked to fight. "You endured." I collapsed. She went on to describe the unraveling of her world in blunt, unsparing detail. The jobs she couldn't get. The interviews that ended before they started the moment someone Googled her name. The couch she'd been kicked off of after overstaying every promise she'd made. The nights spent in a women's shelter where no one cared that she used to wear heels worth more than their weekly budgets. Her narrative was no longer tinged with blame. There was no attempt to reframe herself as a victim, just a shattered recognition of what she'd done and what it had cost her. "I didn't just sabotage you," she wrote. "I destroyed the only person who ever saw anything good in me without expecting something in return." I reread that line more times than I care to admit. It hit like a stone through stained glass, cruelly beautiful in its clarity. She had always been the storm, and I had always tried to stand in it without an umbrella, hoping blood ties could anchor the chaos. But storms don't care who you are. They tear, they scatter, and they move on. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "This is not an apology, it's a eulogy, for the version of me that thought winning meant taking something from someone else. I'm leaving. I need to disappear for a while. Maybe forever. I just thought you should know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just didn't want to vanish without saying something that mattered." She didn't sign it with love, not even Cass, just her full name, as if to finally admit to herself that the girl who destroyed everything wasn't a stranger, wasn't a scapegoat, but truly her. I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. Her words had already stitched the final threads in a story that had unraveled us both. After that, silence. Not the kind that screams with the threat of resurgence, but the kind that settles like dust on untouched furniture. The kind that speaks of true endings. Her social media accounts went dark. Mutual friends stopped mentioning her. It was as though she'd been folded into the edges of memory, no longer present, but always there if you looked hard enough. I didn't look. My own life flourished in the quiet that followed. Promotions gave way to trust, and trust gave way to influence. I joined a board, gave a keynote at a national leadership conference, launched an initiative to support women who had been falsely accused in the workplace. It was the kind of full-circle moment that would have seemed poetic if it hadn't been so hard-earned. I didn't do it to spite her. I did it because survival had reshaped me, reforged something in my spine that would never bend again for convenience or kin. And yet, sometimes I thought of her, not with rage, not even pity, just a strange, spectral empathy, like remembering a shadow that once followed you, but no longer has a body to cast it. I'd pass by places we'd been as kids, diners with syrup-sticky booths and cracked leather seats, and remember how once, long before ambition soured her blood, she used to laugh so hard she'd cry. That version of her, the untainted one, was real too, briefly, tragically. Years passed. I married a man who didn't care about my past but admired the scars it left. He said they made me weatherproof, a word I'd never thought to apply to myself until then. We had a daughter. She has my eyes, but sometimes I see flashes of Cassandra in the way she raises her brow when she's caught lying about something silly. I never tell her that. Some ghosts aren't meant to be passed down. One day, during spring cleaning, I found the letter again, faded, nearly translucent with age. I read it in the quiet of my study, sunlight slicing through the blinds like blades of time. And I did something I hadn't planned. I burned it, watched the edges curl, blacken, and turn to ash, not out of anger, but because I didn't need the proof anymore. I didn't need to remember the wound to honor the strength it took to heal from it. Cassandra had become a chapter, not the whole book, a lesson, not a legacy. In the end, she had taught me the most profound truth. Sometimes family isn't your home, but the fire that makes you build one. And I built mine from stone. No apologies, no returns, just silence and peace.